Hi, teacher friends. My name is Beth Hennis, and in these strange times, I wanted to give you a short copyright lesson for the materials that you may want to use with your students as we move to remote teaching and learning. Remember, just because we are a school, we are not immune to copyright infringement lawsuits. In fact, recently in 2019, the Houston Independent School District was fined $9.2 million plus legal fees for copyright infringements that their employees did across the district. They actually settled for $7.8 million, which is still a lot. And we can learn that ignorance is not a defense in court for us school people. So, as it applies to online learning and teaching, here are some copyright basics that you need to know. Usually, we benefit from what's called the educational exception for face-to-face teaching under the copyright law, and that allows us to show and use materials within the four walls of our classrooms. However, these rights don't apply to remote learning. The good news is that there is something called the TEACH Act, and that gives us the ability to perform and display limited and reasonable portions of materials for use in teaching in an online environment, so long as we meet several conditions. And here they are. So the material has to be limited to only the students enrolled in your course. It has to be legally obtained, and you cannot circumvent digital protections on the material. If it does need to be converted from analog to digital, there can't be a digital copy available for our school to purchase. The material has to be tied to curriculum, and it has to be used in a closed, password-protected environment and made available to students for only the time that they need to use it. Lastly, they ask that you post a copyright warning notice for students with the material. If the TEACH Act doesn't fit, we do have one more option called fair use that may cover what you want to do. Some uses are what we call transformational uses, like parodies or mashups, and those are considered okay to use. Go ahead with those. Otherwise, we move on to the following four factors. All four of these factors must be considered equally, and they exist on a continuum and kind of balanced like a scale. So you'll want to think about which way does it lean, favored or unfavored, and then decide holistically if it is a fair use. The first is purpose. We know that educational uses are favored over commercial uses, but don't stop there. Then we consider the nature of the work. Uses of informational nonfiction materials are favored over highly creative fiction ones. As far as the amount go, there's a lot of myths around this, but there is actually no guideline for how much of a work may be used. Partial uses are favored unless that partial use is like the heart of the material, but there's no such thing as you can use 10% or so many pages or so many seconds. That's not really in the copyright statutes at all. And then lastly, we look at the effect on the market. Does this use damage the ability of the creator to earn a living, or could we be buying it and honoring the creator's work? Here are my copyright takeaways for staff, and I have lots of these. You'll see some extras on this slide because this is a handout that I sometimes use. But I'll try to keep it short, otherwise I would go on and on. So, during these school closures where we're moving to remote learning, I want you to remember to consider the Teach Act and fair use guidelines every time you share materials with your classes. When in doubt, consult your school librarian. You could also try to ask permission from the creator. It's not required if you are already covered by the law, but it is a possibility. Many publishers are willing to work with us, we're finding, especially during these COVID closures. So I have an article shared with you that you can check what the restrictions are with those. I would also ask you to hesitate when scanning or digitizing and then sharing entire texts or full videos. Your school librarian may have a more ethical solution or idea for you. Unfortunately, sometimes that idea may not be exactly what you were hoping for, but it's better to remain ethical in these cases. Try to keep your materials in password-protected closed platforms like Google Classroom, or leaving the video unlisted on YouTube instead of posting it open and public for the entire internet to find. And then please include a copyright notice to your students on borrowed material. I have included a sample notice in the description of this video. And then the last two things I always say when I talk about copyright, because they're kind of difficult for us to wrap our minds around, but license agreements or contracts trump copyright laws and rights. What this means is that personal accounts like Netflix, Prime, Hulu, Audible, etc. generally do not include rights for educational uses. One caveat is that Netflix does have a short list of documentaries that allow us to use in education, but you do need to check that list. And then lastly, just because you found it on the internet for free doesn't mean that you have the right to use it. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, please let me know. As always, I am here to support you.